Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Storyteller Circle. And this time I have the brilliant Professor Tracy Adams with me. She's just written an amazing article. I read it. I highly recommend it to everyone on Anne Boleyn. And her argument is that actually Henry VIII never wanted Anne as a mistress, but wanted Anne as his wife from the very beginning. Is that correct, Tracy?
Yes, and I have to say that it's not only my argument. I mean, other people have said similar things. I think that what I bring to this is an analysis of the particular letter that people tend to base that argument on. And it all centers around one particular word, which is maîtresse or mistress, which is a word that somewhere in maybe the 1960s or so, historians started to understand in our own terms as meaning an extraconjugal partner, sexual partner, long term. So we all know what a mistress is. Prior to that, the scholarship had really not insisted on that interpretation, but saw his intentions, Henry VIII's intentions, as in air quotes, honorable. So it's a really fairly recent interpretation that Henry wanted Anne as his mistress, and then because she refused, he was forced to finally marry her. Didn't really want to do that, but he had to marry her because he could get her in no other way. The idea that he could have had anyone he wanted. Something that people say about him is that he was always madly in love when he first fell in love with somebody. So it seems to me that there's no particular reason to believe that he was more in love with Anne Boleyn than he was with any other of his wives. I mean, he was very much in love with Catherine, right? Of Catherine of Aragon. And he uses the same words, the singular love. He talks to Anne in that famous letter, the letter where he promises to make her his only mistress. He talks about a singular love, but he uses the same expression when he talks about Catherine of Aragon in a letter to her father. He was reputed to have been madly in love with Catherine Howard, so much that he couldn't keep his hands off of her. Jane Seymour, he couldn't wait for Anne to die to marry her. But no one talks about these women as like incredibly and uniquely sexually attractive. So I think that was just sort of the way he behaved with everyone that he fell in love with. He was a very sort of over the top enthusiastic pursuer. But whether he was especially obsessed with Anne Boleyn, I don't think there's any reason to believe that was the case. Question for me at the moment, I mean, there are all kinds of big questions, but the one I'm struggling with now is, do you actually need the Pope to be Catholic? I mean, because I think obviously today, if you're Catholic and you say, I don't really care what the Pope has to say about anything, you're not a very good Catholic. But it's not that clear in the 16th century. I mean, he's a warlord like all others, right? I mean, you make alliances with him and you defend him or you don't defend him, you fight against him and so on. He enters into political leagues. And so I'm not trying to suggest that he wasn't the head of the church. I mean, he was recognized as the head of the church. Nonetheless, he was one of the guys. I mean, and you could sort of gang up against him. He might gang up against you. And Henry says over and over again, I think I can get the Pope to do whatever I want because I've done all kinds of things for him. So it's a very transactional relationship, which makes it different when you just sort of knock him out of your circle. You say, maybe I don't have to listen to the Pope. I don't think it doesn't mean to people in the 16th century that you're not Catholic anymore. I think that's an utterly different sort of, would be a very different step. Yeah.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, he's the foreign prince who's also conquering territories and who's playing a political card. Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
people tend to forget that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's totally true. And it goes back to what we mentioned a little earlier. So you looked at the same sources that we're all looking at, but we as historians, as scholars, as academics, we read sources, but there are different narratives that come from
Yeah.
it,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, right? And how does it happen for you? Like, what's the process?
Oh dear. Yeah. What do we do? We read everyone else's narratives, and then you look for, I would say, maybe sort of red flags or something. What really struck me is that in the typical narrative, what you're really looking at is a stereotype that comes from the very beginnings of time, which is that a young woman incites the lust of an old man, just like Phyllis and Aristotle, or like Samson and Delilah. I mean, it's just so that stereotype is very much present, which doesn't mean it's not true. I mean, we live according to stereotypes, but it does mean it's worth having another look at it and seeing where it developed. And so when you look at where that stereotype developed, you can see it in Reginald Pole, for example. So 1526, or sorry, 1536, he writes this book defending the Catholic Church against Henry VIII's behavior. And so this story is fully formed right there. And you go, this is a source who is the most biased you can imagine. And he's telling this story for a particular reason.
Yes.
So that's where I started. Then you just go back and you reread the things and notice, for example, that the mistress story depends on ma seule maîtresse, my only mistress, meaning mistress in our sense of the word. And I've studied medieval and early modern French quite a lot, and it's absolutely clear to anyone who studied that that's not what the word meant at the time. I mean, it wasn't even really a possible meaning. That becomes a known meaning in the 17th century, but earlier than that, I mean, you call your fiancée your maîtresse. I mean, Henry IV refers to Marie de Médicis as ma maîtresse and says, but when you take on the wife of ma femme, the name of ma femme, then things will change. But when he's calling her ma maîtresse, she's very clearly his fiancée, or what we would call his fiancée. Yeah, so you
Exactly.
just read the narratives and look at where they came from, and then sometimes you see that the narrative seems perfectly reasonable, and sometimes you think you want to make a couple of modifications in it.
And it's exactly it. It's like you read sources, but also I think what you've done so well is also like go back to the definition of a term at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah,
and it does change things because the words have different meanings
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
And you know, I'm doing the translation of Mary Stuart's letters,
Yeah.
and it's
Yes,
not
yeah,
that easy, right? Like you
yeah,
go back, I'm translating like 16th century French into
yeah,
modern
yeah,
English.
yeah,
Please
yeah,
have mercy on
yeah,
my soul. You know, like it's just very very hard because there's some term that you think, oh yes, that means that,
mm,
but you're thinking that means that today.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
you have to check that it meant that in the past, and it can change a complete narrative.
It can change the whole story. Yeah, yeah.
And it's what you showed. And I was really interested in your article actually when you talked about Henry IV and Mary de Medici, because we also know, oh, there's a lot of story about him. I really liked, I don't really like Henry IV, but I really like one of his mistresses, Henriette
Interesting.
d'Entrailles.
I know you do. I know you
I
do. I'm
love
waiting
her.
for you to write about her.
I love her too much. I love her too much. I will,
Okay,
Tracy.
I
I
can't
will. I
wait.
absolutely love her. But like, you know, there was this idea of mistress as well, maîtresse, but he promised her marriage.
He was such a liar, wasn't he? He was terrible. He was just terrible.
You know what? I don't know. Like, I think he, to be fair, it's such a toxic passion
Yeah.
between them. Um, but I think that you know, if she had given a male, uh, at first she doesn't, but she does later on because they don't stop obviously their relationship because Henry the Fourth, when did he ever stop? Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and his dead, you know, dead birth. Anyway, but that's a very interesting narrative, I think, of like what it meant and how it shaped the story
Mm,
of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII.
yeah.
Like the pursuit of a second marriage of someone who was open to the ideas of an annulment, changing things, moving,
Hmm.
you know, moving on with his
Yeah,
own
yeah, yeah,
personal and political
yeah, 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 yeah,
agenda.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that what you've done that absolutely brilliantly. So I
Thank you.
cannot wait for the whole book now.
Can I ask you a question though, since I've got you right here? The thing I'm really struggling with is what do we do with Henry VIII? I mean, how do you deal with a person who does what he does? And I'm trying to sort of neutralize it a bit by saying, well, he executed all kinds of people he was very close to, but I'm just still stuck with that. I mean, so how on earth can we talk about a person loving or being intellectual or being forward looking if he's perfectly willing when she doesn't manage to produce the heir to say, oh, she lied to me, she was never meant to be the heir, and kills her? I mean, how do you deal with that person?
Honestly, Tracy, I'm probably the wrong person. Everything I write, I feel it. I'm so passionate about everything I write. And I'm very honest and open about I hate Henry VIII. If there's one historical
Can you
character that
say?
that I can hate is him.
Yeah.
And I hate the fact that we try to make excuses. I think he was a tyrant.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I think he was someone horrible. I don't think that the fall in 1536 changed him. I think he was horrible before.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that you have to look how he treated Catherine of Aragon. I mean, people just dismiss it. Oh,
Yeah.
he didn't kill her, like, well, he didn't execute her. He didn't
He
order the
didn't
execution of
directly
her.
kill her, right?
He did kill her
Yeah.
in a way, like he did. He removed everything from her. And what I really think is so it shows his cruelty is that what he did to Princess Mary, his
Yeah.
own daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
He even thought about getting rid of her. Like,
Yeah.
like there's all these things where he goes completely mad when
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and I think he's a psychopath,
Yeah.
narcissist, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think he's a monster. So I
Yeah.
don't know how you write about him and like, and I don't think it means that he was not intelligent. Of course, he was intelligent. He was well
Yeah.
educated. He
Yeah.
could read, he could write. He was quite very smart about it. I mean, I don't think it takes away anything from the fact that he was you know, a psychopath and someone who he loved power and he loved himself
Hmm.
so much. So I don't know how you write about someone who has ordered the execution of two of his wives, threatened others.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, even with Jane Seymour, we have it like when she voiced her again, Jane Seymour, very Catholic. She
Yeah.
voiced
Yeah.
her concern about the dissolution of monasteries, and I'm paraphrasing, but more or less, he said,
Yeah.
"Do you
Yeah.
remember what I did
Yeah.
before to my
Yeah.
ex-wife?"
Yeah, yeah, and then he didn't crown Jane Seymour, did he? I mean,
And he
presumably he
wanted to
would have
wait.
once she had her son, but she died too soon. But so he was just waiting also in
He
that case.
doesn't care about anyone else
Yeah,
but him
yeah,
and what he wants for himself.
yeah,
And it's very clear. You have it on repeat. And I think that actually the one of his wives that actually won is not Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr didn't bloody win.
yeah.
It's Anne of Cleves.